So, what's the current world population? 7.5 and growing rapidly, exponentially, I should say, which we know is shaped how? J, good. So our current world population is 7.5 billion and perfect population. That's all we talk about and interpreting graphs. So, but we're going to focus on human population now, okay? So, I mean, if we go back to unit 1 or unit 2 when I introduced humans and changes, name me something that you think affected humans population. It could be negative or positive. Technology, definitely. What part of technology led to a major change?
Like the medicine.
Good.
Oh,
the discovery of a germ. The making of antibiotics and vaccines, which some of you just got. Shout out to. And they are a reason why we could live longer. So that changes the population growth because people are living longer. What else caused people to live longer? Settling. What did you do when you settled? So the transition from hunter-gatherers to agricultural led to what? Better what? Health. Why? Sanitation. You took a shower. You had nutrients in your food because you were growing. Those are the major shifts for agriculture. And then as humans, we can expand to new habitats easily. We deplete forests. We build lands, so it gives us opportunity to continue to grow, so this leads to more growth. These are 3 reasons why the population is growing. I'm going to talk about all reasons for growth, decline, or steady in the next couple slides. Here's the really interesting thing. If I take this graph and I go back into the early time, it's very steady, the total world population, okay? But since 1950, the population has doubled, and they expect 2 billion more people by 2050. How do they determine this? Is based on studies that they do with the population patterns, birth rate patterns, death rate patterns. All of these things we'll take into account. This graph, what would you say? What can you tell me about this graph? Just start saying things. There's an S going on here, so you know that around 2050, the population will what? Stabilize. What happened here? It grew exponentially because we see the J-shaped curve, right? And then, so if you got this graph, you would say from 1750 to about 1950s, the population was fairly steady. And then there was an exponential growth, and then it's predicted that there'll be stabilizing population around blank year. If I can also ask you what contributed to this. So throughout the notes, you're going to get answers to those questions, okay? So you will get graphs, you will interpret the graphs, and you will answer reasons for these changes in the graphs. So let's talk about something that can affect these graphs. And if I show you this map, what are you referencing? It's a vocab word we've already covered. Developed countries, or what we call more developed countries, right? And then on the red, you've got the less developed countries, or what they reference as developing countries. And with that, you're going to look at specific things that's obvious, and economy is a huge portion. More developed countries have higher incomes than less developed countries. They have what's called a strong social support system, which means they have, and I'm talking about more developed countries, they have higher education, more opportunities for education, better healthcare options. People they go to school and they get jobs. It's part of their life. So that leads to a lot of changes versus less developed countries. They have what they reference as a weak social system. We are considered industrial societies. They're considered agricultural or farmers, which changes the mentality of having kids or not having kids. And we're growing right now at a slower rate than they are, but at the end of the day, the world is growing exponentially. End of story. It will stabilize. There's going to be a lot of contributing factors for that, but they predict that the majority of the growth of the population is going to come from less developed countries, or what we call developing countries. Whenever they want to calculate birth rates, often, not whenever, they calculate it as accrued birth rate, and the same goes for death rate. It's the number of births per 1,000 in a population, okay, or number of deaths per 1,000. And this is just another graph Again, if I gave you something like this, you want to look at this and try to come up with explanations so that you can reference them, because you will get graphs and have to explain them. There's 3 vocabulary words that have the word fertility in them, so you really got to focus on trying to remember them. Replacement fertility rate is easy. What do you think that is? There you go. You want to have enough children to replace yourself. Fertility rate is actually the number of children you will have in your lifetime. And if you notice in this map, fertility rates in the center of the state are higher than around the cities where it's more populated. So even though more people live here, it's because obviously you want to live near the water and you want to live and you want to be urbanized, right? So the more rural areas have more kids. And you see where the high birth rates still, or high fertility rates still are. Total fertility rate, so the last of those vocab, is the average number of children born to a woman during her reproductive years. So all you're adding to that definition is reproductive years. I don't know why it's a third vocab. Okay, so here's another graph about the average number of children a woman has. And you notice, just by looking at this, so if you were going to interpret this, from 1965 to 1970, people were having more kids overall, all over the world, right? And then from 1995 to 2000, all over the world, those numbers dropped. But at the end of the day, you could still say in Africa and Asia, the women were still having a lot more kids than what we call more developed regions. This is also like a less developed region, and then in comparison to the world, okay? So that's your interpretation of those graphs. For this slide, you're going to get this, and you're going to have to know what happened in the 1950s. What happened in the baby boom?
They came back from war.
The men came home from war, okay? So we had a Great Depression, and during depression or during hard economic times, the population usually declines. And there's war. And then we recovered, and then the soldiers came home, and you got to know that. And then they're predicting, the reality is people stopped having less kids because there were so many here compared to here, but that's stabilized. And I would say it's probably dropping, but according to this graph, and whatever graph you get, that's the way you answer the question. So even if the notes are stopping right here, if there's in your graph, it goes down, you have to explain that drop, okay? All right, so then we move on to what affects birth rates. I think I have 2 more slides, so we could get through this. And these can be positive and negative things, okay? So women usually have a lot to do with having kids or not, yes? Even though you're a couple, the changes in women's leads to changes in birth rates. So give me some ideas. Birth control, of course. If you have the ability to gain access to birth control or even take care of some things that we don't believe in, that could lead to less births, right? What else? I heard it. Did you say it? Religion, sure. So your culture and your beliefs. So if you're Catholic, you believe you should have as many kids as God wants you to have, right? You shouldn't use birth control, and you should let God decide. Some religions don't think that, right? That is true. What else? Cost, for sure. How much is it going to cost you to have this child? If you're, I'm going to say this without the video.
Why would it?
All right, what else? Economical. So women actually going to work, that's a huge thing. When women used to have kids at the age of 20-something, now they're waiting, they're going to school, they're getting a job, and then they say, okay, now. Which means instead of having 4, you're having 1 or 2, right? Sanitation. I'm gonna expose them. That's not there. Children needed to go to work. Sanitation in terms of urbanization. So urbanization led to clean lives, more medicine, more work, less children, yes? And then we've got here education, again, like I mentioned, and less infant mortality rate in general. It could be more or less. Can affect birth rates. Okay. So these are factors that affect birth rates. They could affect them positively or negatively. So if you see children needed to work, what do you think is going to happen to the population? Or birth rates? Goes up. you want children to work for you in the farm, you're going to have more kids because you need them to work for you. And you need them to take care of you in the future. Urbanization is the shifting from rural areas to cities. What do you think is going to happen to the population or birth rates? Decrease, okay? So you want employment opportunities, increase or decrease? Decrease, right? And education, decrease. Now, if men have employment opportunities, women might not go to work, right? So then it could increase. Women going to work decreases definitely. So think about those things, okay? Now, there's only really two main factors that affect death rates. So disease would definitely lead to this one of these factors, which is what? So there's two things that affect, or two vocabulary words that describe death rates. Natural causes or disease can lead to what? Death. And if you don't have them, then you have what? Health. You have you have lifespan, guys. So you have ability to live long lives, okay, which is this side. And then you also have to take into consideration mortality rates of infants because they vary across the country and they vary for specific reasons. So right here I'm describing why are people living longer, and then here I'm describing what makes infant mortality rates higher, okay? So why are people living longer? We know the answer, flat out, medicine. The invention of medicine led to increase in life expectancy by almost 15 years. What else? What was the first shift? Agriculture. So it's not just about food, guys. It's about the type of food. A lot of countries can provide food to their people, but it's not food with the proper nutrition, which leads to health issues. So amount of food is definitely a factor. Type of food, more importantly, and then who's getting this food, because the distribution of food is a disaster. And then, like, again, in agricultural shift, you took a shower, you brush your teeth, so you sanitized, and that led to an increase in lifespan too. What makes infant mortality rates high? Drugs. So people using drugs or women using drugs, definitely. What else? What? Poverty, definitely. And then, what? No. Early, like teenagers. They hide it, they don't take care of themselves, right? So that leads to high risk of death rates for infants.